Hi, my name is Garrett Thornton, and I am part of a group of college students in America that has been studying the economic, cultural, and political differences between the United States and China. This is a proposal for conducting business in China, an economically emerging country. In this group, we have Alessandro de Costa, Amy Ryder, myself, Garrett Thornton, Jesse Zornes, Melodie Lewis, and Nanci Lupson. Hofstede's cultural dimensions comprise of several categories that clarify many cultural differences and how they affect communication and behavior between the various cultures. The Hofstede dimension tools used to compare the United States and China include six Hofstede categories. These categories are power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. Analyzing the differences between countries gives us negotiation techniques to improve our business relations. As you can see on this slide, there's a graph and there's also a chart of numbers that show how these two countries and economies differ. We're going to break down each one. Power distance. China has a much greater power distance than the United States. This means that China accepts the subordinate superior relationship. Americans, on the other hand, believe they can reach a higher status based on effort. Individualism. The United States is a much more individualistic society, whereas China is a more collective society. Americans would focus on equal rights and promoting themselves. The Chinese would act in the interest of their group. Masculinity. Both countries have similar masculinity rankings with a desire for achievement and success. Uncertainty avoidance. The United States rates higher in uncertainty avoidance than China, but both are overall below average. Americans welcome the freedom of expression and don't worry about too many things. China rates even lower without adherence to strict laws. The language is also very ambiguous to the meaning. Long-term orientation. China has a much higher long-term orientation than the United States. The Chinese have a very practical and realistic approach. They base decisions on the situation compared to Americans who believe in a right and a wrong and will base their action on these inner beliefs. Indulgence. The United States ranks higher in the indulgence factor, meaning they have less control over their impulses. Chinese may feel that if they indulge, they are doing something wrong or that the worst case scenario would happen. In business transactions, an American management team needs to manage communication and motivation differences. These include showing respect to Chinese leadership positions. When working on a deal in China, use the words we instead of I. Think of how the product would help the Chinese business collectively. Point out the successful benefits to both China and the United States. Be patient with the negotiation process as the Chinese may still want to negotiate even after the paperwork is finalized. Focus on the practical and realistic reasons behind a deal being made. Try to control business impulses, don't jump to conclusions too quickly. Following these business practices will offset the difference and clarify the cultural differences. Communication scales. As you can see, the United States and China communicate very differently. We're going to talk about how they communicate, how they receive feedback, and the scheduling differences between the two cultures. When it comes to communications, the United States is a low context culture, which means that any verbal or written communication that occurs is clear and precise. China, on the other hand, tends to be a high context culture when it comes to communication. This means that any verbal or written messages contain more context and meaning. The United States tends to be more middle of the road with how they respond to their feedback. They tend to sugarcoat things in an attempt to not harm feelings. Then there's China, who tends to lean towards giving indirect negative feedback. This means that they let others pick up on what they are saying. Scheduling. When it comes to scheduling, the United States takes a more linear approach, which means things are run in sequence and have strict deadlines. China, on the other hand, is more flexible. They tend to take on many tasks at once and adapt more easily to the situation at hand. Negotiation and bargaining techniques. We're not going to cover every single one of the things on the screen, but there are many things that help the negotiations and bargaining between the two countries. Some of the key strategies in negotiations and bargaining in China are to have the primary focus of the first meeting to be about building rapport with those individuals in the situation and establishing a relationship. These initial meetings are not used to discuss the decision-making process, but rather just gain confidence in each other and understanding the interests and goals of the overall negotiation. China places a large focus on the long-term benefit of the product or service, which needs to be a talking point when discussing the products that we are bringing to the market. This also helps maintain a positive relationship between the customer and the business. It is also important to refrain from logical reasoning and becoming emotional, as this shows a weakness in self-control and can hurt the overall negotiation. Also, as the negotiations proceed, it's very important to not make a final or expiring offer, as this deadline can be used against the negotiations, and rest assured it will be used against the negotiations. Some of the key tactics that should be used are making sure you have a negotiation strategy. You can guarantee that the counterpart will, and they will be able to use it against the negotiations if we are not prepared. We also need to make sure that the team involved in the negotiations is making the decisions as a team and everyone is on the same page. If it is needed, we should assemble a trusted translation team so we can be assured we are being provided with the correct translation and description of responses. It's important to leave egos at home, and we want to demonstrate self-control, and as this can be seen as a weakness. Patience is a virtue in all aspects of Chinese culture, and especially in regards to bargaining and negotiation. Finally, we need to be reasonable. In situations, if we demonstrate we are unreasonable, we can damage the reputation of the company and the product. China's government is divided into 4 separate branches, which are executive, the judicial, the legislative, and the military branches, respectively. What most draws the attention of the majority of the world's population to China is its political system, since the type of market socialism propagated by the country is one of the most controversial. China's government has a predominant role in the economy. China is a country with 2 economic systems controlled by a single political system, the Communist Party. Chinese authorities are imposing stricter rules for foreign companies to enter the country. At the same time, are more tolerant of Chinese competitors. However, the biggest challenge to multinationals in China are the new local brands that are invading the market. At the beginning of China's economic opening, there were few competitive brands. Multinationals had superior technology and a smarter and more experienced marketing strategy, but local businesses are growing at a rapid rate and are conquering Chinese consumers. The Heritage Foundation puts out an annual index of economic freedom. As you can see on the screen, we compare China with the United States. China ranked number 100 out of 186 countries in 2019, and they fall into the category of mostly unfree. The reasonings for this are explained on the right, as you can see the 12 different categories and independent freedom indicators that the Heritage Foundation uses. In comparison, in 2019, the United States ranks number 12th globally, and they fall into the mostly free category. As you can see, property rights, government integrity, and investment freedom, as well as financial freedom, are some of the ones that these 2 countries differ in the most. These are things that need to be taken into account with any business negotiation and any business perspective in China, is that there's less freedoms over in China than there are in the United States. In the United States, we see many businesses pop up from home using the internet or other means of spreading their business, where in China those things are regulated and governed a lot more. The next slide we'd like to talk about is foreign direct investment. This is something that is particularly important for a company like ours thinking about doing business in China. Foreign direct investment is an investment made by a firm or an individual in one country into business interests located in another country. In 2017, $136 billion were invested in foreign direct investment in China. The main four sectors made up 67% of that FDI. That's manufacturing, information transmission, real estate, leasing, and business services. In China, there are various tax exemptions, tax credits, and free zones, and most of this has occurred since 1978 when the economy of China started to become increasingly liberalized. The top five investors in China, as you can see there on the left, are Hong Kong, Singapore, the Virgin Islands, South Korea, and Japan. What you don't see there is the United States. They were seventh on that list in 2017. And the reasoning for those top five is mainly because of geography. Those are countries that are in a similar region of the world as China. The economy and the currency exchange with the United States, we're comparing the United States dollar with the Chinese currency of the yen. When we look at the currencies between the two countries, there's a lot to take into account between the two. In 2015, the Chinese yen was devalued, and it has bounced back some in comparison with the US dollar. Another thing to take into account is the inflation, which has stayed largely similar the last 5 years in China, somewhere between 1.4 and 2.6%. If China's inflation was rising, investment in a business based out of China would not be a good idea because of the value of the dollar would be less. Unfortunately, over the last 5 years, China's inflation has remained fairly steady. So this is not a deciding factor. Along with inflation, interest rates have also remained steady. If the interest rate had gone up, starting a business in China would be a costly venture. Those are some factors to take into account when we're talking about the economy and the currency exchange between the United States and China. Next, we would like to get into the three products that we have come up with as potential products that we could market in China. The first product we would like to offer to the Chinese market is home test kits to detect early stages of liver cancer. According to the BBC News, 130 million people in China have hepatitis B. Given this data and the aging population, this gives them a significant increased risk in liver cancer. An unmet need is at-home liver cancer test kits for early detection. This is a new technology that could be developed into test kits for in-home use. Currently, the competition involves expensive testing in hospitals and doctors' offices. Too often, liver damage and liver cancer are not tested until there are health-deterring symptoms. Early detection or increased risk can be diagnosed at home by purchasing these test kits. The kits test damaged or mutated DNA found in the blood that is linked to the liver. The potential issues is getting approval from the Chinese government for production and sale. Just like the FDA in America, these test kits may have to get approval for sale in the country. If they get denied, perhaps similar to a DNA test, a strand of hair can be tested for risks of disease or certain cancers instead of using a blood sample. The second product we would like to offer to the Chinese market is reusable, environmentally friendly household air filters. China has some of the worst air pollution in the world. In recent years, China has made a very strong push to become more environmentally friendly. They have a strong focus on improving the environment and going green. The idea behind this air filter is to create a reusable air filter that does not require replacement after a few months of use, while still providing the same great quality that other air filters provide, eliminating the additional waste. These filters can be improved to not only be for homes and businesses, but also support for machines and other mechanical needs, which is a huge industry in China. The primary competitors in this market are Dongyang and Heifler Shanghai. Most other air filters are sold online. Both of these companies are still offering the typical disposable air filters and do not offer a reusable air filter. The potential issues include scaling the new product and determining the standard sizing. Having the product be new, different, and better is the ultimate goal. The third product we would like to offer to the Chinese market is easy-to-use, large-faced flip phones designed for the growing elderly population. China's most underserved market is by a large percentage the elderly. Many of their needs are not being adequately met. By not meeting their needs, a large profit is overlooked. In a survey taken of the elderly in China, 62 out of 65 are lacking adequate social interaction. Redesigned, volume-enhanced, easy-to-use flip phones for calling and texting would be a perfect product to meet the social interaction needs of the elderly. There is very little competition for any type of flip phones in China. Most phone companies no longer sell or market these kinds of phones. The potential problems of selling these phones is that technology is constantly changing. As phones improve in a crowded technology market, those who will be out of date and new smartphone-only versions will create a new learning curve for the elderly to adjust to. The elderly are not focused on as much as other markets, but even their needs and wants still need to be met because they too help contribute to the economic market. Next, you'll see the references that we use to create this presentation. But we thank you for your time. We thank you for your consideration in the three products that we think would fit the Chinese market. And we thank you for your interest in our company and our plans on marketing those products to China.